So far we've created two validators, required and is between. We're going to compose our third and final validator, and we're going to do that by combining the required and is between validator. This one's going to be called validate measurement, and it's going to check if the measurement is both present, so it's going to be required, and then it's also going to check if it falls between the correct values. So let's go ahead and write a test again. We're going to use TDD as before, and we're going to write a validate measurement validator in here. And what this is going to do is validate against the correct metrics, which is going to be either kilograms or pounds. So let's go ahead and write our first test case, and this is going to be the happy path where everything passed. So I'm just going to say it returns valid is true. Valid is true. And this is going to be where the weight falls in the correct range and it is not null. So I'm going to create my new variable, and this is just going to be assigned to the result of validate measurement. The first argument is going to be the input. I'm going to say 100, and the second one is going to be the constraints, which is going to be kilograms in this case. So I'm going to create a new variable eventually called constraints, and then we're going to grab the kilogram measurements out of that. I'm then going to go ahead and write my expectation, and it's going to be very similar to the other ones. I'm just going to say valid is true, and let's go ahead and save this off, and we're going to get a ton of errors, of course, because we haven't defined any of these functions. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump over to my implementation file, which I believe is called validations. And let's go ahead and define that function for now. And of course, we're going to have to export that one to make it available. The signature is going to be exactly the same as is between. It's going to have a value, a min and a maximum. And then we're going to go ahead and combine both the required and the is between validator. Before we do that, we're going to export our actual constraints, which is going to be kilograms and pounds. So I'm going to call this one constraints, and that's going to have two keys, kilograms. I'm going to say the minimum is just going to be 30 and the max is going to be 200. And for pounds, it's going to be a little bit different. Of course, we're going to have to change those. So let's go ahead and do that. The minimum is going to be, in this case, 66, and the maximum is going to be 440. Let's go ahead and save this off. It is going to fail still because we haven't imported these variables. So I'm going to head over to my test now and import those now. Let's just space things out a little bit to make it a bit more readable before we go on. So we're going to go ahead and import the validate measurement function, and we're also going to grab constraints as well. And if we save this off, we should be getting a different error, and so we're getting undefined because the function doesn't return anything, which is exactly what we expected. Let's go ahead and update that now. So the first thing we're going to do is see if it is not null. So I'm going to create a new variable called here and say is required or is not null. It's probably not a very good name for a variable, but I'm going to go with that for now anyway. And we're just going to call required here and pass in the value. And then we're going to check if is not null dot valid is false. And if it is false, we're going to go ahead and return that result. And that's going to have the correct validation for us. So let's just say is not null. And it's third time lucky, there we go. The next thing we're going to have to check is if it is between the correct validation, the correct values as well. So let's go ahead and create another variable here. And I'm just going to say is valid. So let's say falls between. Again, probably not the best variable name, but I'm going to use that for now anyway. And we're going to pass in is between, pass in the value, and then we're going to pass in the minimum and maximum here as well. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. Check it if it is invalid. And if it is invalid, we know that we have the correct validation message. We've already implemented that logic. So we can just go ahead and return that as is. Finally, if we manage to get to the end of this, we're going to assume everything is true. So let's go ahead and save this off. And hopefully everything is going to pass. And so it is. Let's go ahead and test a few more cases, for example, where it's actually going to fail. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy this test, and then we're going to update it. In this case, we're going to say it's outside the constraint, so I'm going to make this 500, which is obviously far too large. It is now going to be false, and then we're going to have our message in here as well. So let's go ahead and say message, and that's just going to be the minimum and maximum, which is 30 and 200. So we're going to say must be between, and if I remember my numbers correctly, it should be 30 and 200. Let's save this off and see what happens. That is still passing, and just to make sure, I'm going to change this, and we should see the correct failure, and we are getting the correct failure. So everything is working correctly. I don't really feel the need to test the other case for is required because we've already tested that down here in this other test, so I'm confident everything is now working correctly.